Hey everyone, it's Spacetown, and I am here to talk about live performance using the Dirtywave M8. First things first, I haven't really used my voice very much on this channel, pretty much at all on this channel. And that is because I thought that I was going to keep this channel just a performance and a song composition channel where I, just play music that I made on these M8s, and that would be it. But I have received a lot of, well, not a lot, but more attention than I thought I would for some of these live performance videos, along with a bunch of questions as to how my setup is set up, why I'm doing things this way, what controllers I'm using. And so I thought it was time to make kind of an explainer video about my approach to live performance with the two M8s that I have here, and more generally what my approach to live performance is with electronic music. And I thought that now was a pretty good time to do that because I've been seeing a growing number of videos from both inside and outside the Dirtywave community, talking about this cool little device that we have here, the M8. I like the idea of Tim's project getting bigger and bigger, but one of the things that I haven't seen covered as much is live performance. And I think that live performance using these devices is extremely cool. I really enjoy the approach that Tim has set up here. And I think that, among other things, it is actually the aspect of this device that separates it from pretty much anything else I've used. I have spent too much money, buying into different setups. So I've had a bunch of different configurations for this kind of live performance using hardware thing, but the M8 has really separated itself from the rest of the pack just purely based on the way that you can configure this and the way that you can actually perform live with this. So this device is separating itself not just from other trackers like the Polyand tracker, it's separating itself from a lot of, these live performance devices like your Electron drum machines, your Arturia drum machines, even some Roland drum machines are pretty well handled by using the M8 right here. So I wanted to talk about live performance. I think it's a hole that hasn't been filled in the YouTube M8 tracker space, and so hopefully this video is a good explainer for how to approach live performance on here. But before I dive into my approach to performance on the M8 specifically, right, I want to talk a little bit about my background and my history with live performance, because I personally think context is extremely important when it comes to performance and performativity. And, there are a lot of videos online talking about how to, and I can use scare quotes here, perform live when it comes to electronic music. But, there's a very big difference between a standard DJ having a lot of fun with their audience and, doing nothing more complex than maybe dropping the low end EQ, right? Maybe dropping their low end out for a little build up, and then everyone gets all excited, and then the kick drum and the bass comes back in and everyone gets, there's a big difference between someone doing that and someone with this big, expansive setup that costs like $5,000, and they turn a knob to change a filter cutoff to a small part of the song that no one notices. People connect a lot more with the first type of performer, and I have spent a lot of time wondering about why. So when I started off doing live performance, I started off in chiptune, right? So it was, for the unaware, it's music made on old video game systems. And so I primarily used Game Boys, just the chunky Nintendo Game Boys, and Little Sound DJ for my performances. And they're really great as a prop to use in a performance, right? You're never going to not have someone kind of come up to you and look, oh, what is that? Are they using Game Boys? Oh my God, right? But the way I structured my songs in Little Sound DJ and the way that I structured my performances made it pretty difficult for me to improvise during performances. I'm not totally sure what the familiarity that people watching this channel have with Little Sound DJ, but typically it's like one project contains one song. And so in order to do really smooth transitions between them, you essentially need to load up new projects. And so the way I set up my performances with Little Sound DJ is I would essentially play my own songs like a DJ would, where I'd have one track on a set of 2 Game Boys and then another track on another set of 2 Game Boys, and then I would beat match them live during the set. And that was cool. It was fun. It was good to do. But during the actual song playback, it was kind of tough to do anything to the track that would change things in a meaningful way. I was writing what was essentially trance music. So, I'm sitting there for 5 to 7 minutes per song, and I've done my beat matching work. I'm just waiting for everything to happen. I could do a little bit of blending between songs, but a lot of the times I was just sitting up there waiting for things to happen. And there's only so many times I can sit up there, wave my arms, pretend to be excited when I, as a performer, am actually incredibly bored. Eventually, I made it into the more general electronic music space. So I started integrating Game Boys with Ableton, started composing with Ableton, started performing with Ableton, and I somehow found it even more difficult to improvise. With Ableton, you have all of these possibilities for doing things live. You can mute different tracks, you can change the order of the tracks, you can change the way that things are being played, you can strip down, build up, all of this stuff. But the way that I was composing in Ableton, it was like ambient music with kind of trap drum elements, and it was really complex, and the way I was writing my songs meant that if I deviated from them, I would essentially need to figure out a way to do kind of like live drum programming, or drumming live with the rest of the track, and I wasn't skilled enough at drumming to do that. So when I was performing with Ableton, I found it pretty difficult to improvise because, I have to establish a baseline of my own activity on stage, right? So I need to let people know when I press this button that will correspond with this musical element dropping out or coming back in. When I twist this knob, that will correspond with this musical element changing the way it sounds, right? And so with Ableton and with live performance, you have a lot less time to perform, right? Because not only are you doing the actual performance, you have to establish some sort of baseline of physical movement to music elements changing, right? And so that's hard. It's hard to do. And the sets I was playing were 30-minute sets. I'm playing on these pretty large lineups, so I don't have that much time. So I found myself kind of bored, and on stage again, I also found myself re-exporting my stems, redoing my live setup, basically every single time I wanted to perform live. It was basically just a complete breakdown of my live set and then restructuring of my live set. So that was tough, right? I'm in Ableton. I have this very expansive, very limitless music making software and music performance software, and I'm still doing the thing of essentially exporting stems, laying them out in my track, and then playing the track all the way through without any real ability to change the way that the music sounds, because I don't have the time to do the work to say, this is how my music should sound, and then this is where my music could be if I press these buttons and turn these knobs, right? So that is one of my main tenets of live performance, is establishing your baseline, giving the audiences a sense of what to expect generally from your set, and then pushing them and pulling them into different areas away from that baseline. That's where I think the most impressive live performance approaches lie, is giving the ability for the audience to kind of follow you into where you're going. If I'm sitting here with this big nest of wires and knobs and 6 different devices making 20 different sounds, there's no way for the audience to understand what I'm doing up on stage. So it's difficult for the audience to follow me into different performance areas, right? If I want to make things a little bit more hardcore, make it harsher, break things down a little bit, it's hard because I haven't given the audience the tools they need to interpret what I want to do. So without that, if I start breaking things down, then there's no connection to me as a performer. This is why I think establishing the baseline and moving away to in different directions is very important when it comes to live performance. And so that's what I realized during my time with Ableton. You don't need the ability to change the music in all these different ways if one change results in the music changing in a very significant way. A lot of techno, we have almost a primitive rhythm that people can latch onto, lose themselves in, get entranced in. And then once you're in there, once you're in that techno space, you have your rhythms and your rhythmic strategies, any change to that rhythm becomes a lot more compelling. It's easy to get lost in a very basic rhythmic pattern, right? We can have a 4-in-the-4 kick drum, we can have an open hi-hat on the 8th notes and then a closed hi-hat on the 16th notes. That's basically all you need to get someone kind of grooving, right, rhythmically. When you establish this relatively simple pattern, taking away one of those parts or changing the way that one of those parts sounds creates a very, very outsized impact in the listener. If I take away the kick drum, suddenly that big booming rhythm that the listener has latched themselves onto is gone, right? And so we're suddenly thrown into a period of uncertainty. Where did that go? When is it coming back? Is it going to come back, right? There are all these decisions that I can make, and all of these ways that I can bring the audience with me or the performer into different places, right? We can change the way that the kick drum sounds. We can introduce new synth patterns. We can remove another element, right? Maybe get rid of the open hi-hat or the closed hi-hat. We're moving the listener and the audience into a different area. And then once the kick drum comes back in, we've brought them somewhere else, right? And this is what I think makes techno so effective as a performative practice, is we're dealing with extremely simple patterns, right? They're not complex, or not that complex, but the complexity lies in the performance. It's in the ability of the performer to take people into different places by changing the way that these simple elements work with each other. That's kind of my approach to performativity and why I think techno is a really great area to explore this performativity and performance theory, essentially. Some of the other live performers that I looked towards for inspiration, I looked a lot at Surgeon. Surgeon from the UK was really big and informed my approach by a lot. Karen, which is I think the collaboration between Blawan and I forgot the other guy. I gotta look it up. Wired, Karen, Pariah. Okay. Cool. Karen was also a big inspiration, so the collaboration between Blawan and Pariah. Mylar Melodies also had a video about live performing with Modular, which I think is a pretty good video to think about how to approach practicing for live performance and the approach that Mylar Melodies takes when it comes to performing, I think is pretty good. Looked at all of these performers, looked at the way that they were doing this kind of thing, looked at how I could emulate some of these principles and approaches. And so what I landed on was I wanted to, one, have a very small number of sound sources or a very small number of devices that could make sound, right? So that's my first tenet of live performance for me, is I don't want to get lost in a bunch of different things that can make sound, because it's easy for me to get lost as a performer. It's easy for the audience to get lost when it comes to what are they doing, right? What are they changing in their performance? So that's my first tenet. Second tenet is to be able to kind of naturally move between different patterns without planning, without having to arrange things beforehand. That's one of the main blockers I had with the way I approached live performance. Is so much of my music was pre-planned, pre-arranged, pre-composed. And so with techno, I was trying to give myself the ability to break away from those song structures and song patterns, which I think is really great. Third tenet is to have a clear delineation between drums and synths. Having drums and synths separated is really intuitive to me because I feel like there's a different mindset that goes into handling changing these elements in the drums and the synths. With the drums, I feel like, and I'll go into this soon. With the drums, they're much more structure based, right? The drums kind of structure the song. They dictate the section of the song that you're actually in, and then give the listener kind of a broader context for what's inside of it, right? So if I have a kick drum but no hi-hat, right, I'm kind of near the beginning of the song. I haven't established all of my elements yet. If I have kick drum and open hi-hat and closed hi-hat, then I am really in it. We're almost at the most intense part of the song. If I have a hi-hat pattern but no kick drum, we might be in a breakdown. We might be in a build-up, right? So drums handle the structure. The synths, right? The synth parts, the other rhythms, dictate the energy within the structure. And the energy within the structure is usually based around the rhythms of the synth parts, and the density of the synth parts, right? So how many voices are playing, and what are the rhythms that are playing in there? Are they on the beat, right? Are they on every downbeat? Are they every 16th note? Are they not on every 16th note? Does it not even go for a full bar before it repeats? These are the things that I'm looking at when I'm dealing with my synths and how they dictate the energy. So that's my approach to live performance. And so the first formalized performance of this was I performed under the name Parting a few years ago, and it was the first the real experiment with this approach, right? So I had a Digitact, which handled my drums, and Ableton handled the synth parts. And none of it was pre-planned. It was really nice to actually not have it pre-planned. I had patterns pre-written, but the sequencing itself was was entirely live, right? I just start a drum pattern, start messing around with a few patterns, see if I like the interaction between those patterns. If not, kind of move on. If I do, then I can sit there and enjoy myself. And if the audience sees that I'm enjoying myself and they understand what I'm doing, then they can enjoy themselves, right? My approach to the setup, right, before the performance, I was able to spend a little bit of time over a few weeks every day, writing maybe 1 or 2 or 3 patterns, right? New patterns that would maybe work well, maybe not work well together. Who knows, right? I wouldn't actually know until the performance. And so that's what's really exciting is I don't know if it'll sound good until I get there. And I didn't have to go through the process of writing a whole song to do that. I could just write a pattern, put it away, wait until the performance, and then if this pattern sounds good with this drum loop, then I'm going to stay in there and I'm going to, keep messing around with it. If not, I can just move on. And it's a very short amount of time spent for composition with a potentially large payoff. And that's entirely dependent on the vibes of the performance. So I thought that was very rewarding, and I really enjoyed coming to those realizations while I was performing. That's the main reason why I really enjoy this kind of performance. All right, so let's get into how I'm actually using the M8s over here. So before we actually get into the performance part of the video, I want to talk a little bit about how I have these projects set up and the compositional aspects. So I think that this is really important because it really facilitates the live performance aspect of the setup by allowing me to kind of separate the act of composition from the act of performance, and then I can also do everything on one M8 and only break the second one out if I need to actually perform something. So what I'll do is I work on both of these projects, and I have a drum project and a synth project. So I'll work on both of those on one M8, and then when I want to perform, I'll just break the drums project out on the SD card and put it on the other M8. Let's get into how I have these projects laid out. So I have my drum project here on this left M8. And the way that this is laid out is I have each individual row for, I have this laid out by rows essentially. And there is blank space in between those rows. So I will be perpetually looping on one row when I start it. And so each of these rows is a completed drum pattern. It's supposed to work together with itself. Everything on the same row is supposed to fit together with everything else on that row. So this allows me to have traditional tracks that kind of play out. But because they're loops, I can let them go as long as possible. And then when I want to switch between different patterns, I can do so by changing the kick drum on the existing pattern and moving that down to the second row while keeping the rest of the percussion the same. So it makes for really smooth transitions, and it allows me to kind of mix and match. But more so than the synth project, the drums project is meant to kind of work together all on one row. And so it's a little bit more intuitive than my synthesizer project. The track layout is essentially, I have my first two tracks as kick drums. I like to build big kick drums, so these two are essentially the same kick drum. I have 4 patterns of percussion. So these percussive elements, let's go through these really quick. So kick drum. I also have percussive elements that kind of build the space in between the kick drum and the hi-hats, right? And then I'm going to mute the hi-hats. So this is the space. This is the space I have in between kick drum and hi-hats. And so that I usually don't touch these knobs very much during the performance. They're kind of supposed to stay present until I start transitioning to a new section. And then I have my hi-hats, which are my last 2 tracks. I have a closed hi-hat pattern, which is the 16th note one, and the open hi-hat pattern, which is my 8th note hi-hats. And so these provide a little bit more of a sense of structure than the percussive parts, but the kick drum kind of binds the whole thing together. This is generally how I feel like techno works, at least for my projects. So the last thing I want to go over before I move on to the synth parts is I don't use any synthesized drums. I've been asked before, do I use synthesized drums or not? No synthesized, all samples. I like to be able to play with big scales when it comes to techno, so I find like synthesized drums, and I've tried this in other kinds of drums before, like the drum brutes and stuff like that. It's just too small for me, and I could do some synthesis if I wanted, but I don't want to work too heavily on synthesized percussion on the M8. I like to do that on the computer. Synths is different because, you know, I don't have to prescribe myself to a particular largeness when it comes to percussion. So all of the drum patterns that I'm using are all samples. So that said, all of these loops are meant to work with each other. So again, I can kind of bring things in and out as I want. Moving on to the synth project. So the synth project works like the drum project if you turned it 90 degrees. So instead of working with rows, I'm working with columns. Each column is meant to be a kind of vague category of pattern. So for my first track, I have bass lines, right? So bass lines, I have different kinds of bass lines, so they'll play differently. I have like my acid stuff too, but all of these kind of fall under the general umbrella of bass, right? My second track is melodic leads. So, you know, those kind of work as lead parts for my my tonal sections. I have repetitive rhythmic leads. I mean, not repetitive rhythmic melodic material. On my third track, my fourth track is like pretty pads that I can use to kind of like calm down the whole performance. My fifth tracks and on, I tend to go a little bit more atonal. I like to kind of split the M8 into two tonal and atonal sections. So this is my atonal leads part. I have atonal kind of more rhythmic, more rhythmic patterns. And then my seventh track are my big, mean, heavy synthesizer kind of sounds, right? So these are big lead parts, but they're kind of meaner than the big lead parts I have on the second track. And then I don't actually use my eighth track for anything. It's not in the performance. I use it as a reference drum track, so I export a loop out from the drum pattern, the drum project, and lay it out as a pattern, so I have a really quick, easy reference while I'm composing to see if things generally work with the drum loop that I'm making. So the way that this is laid out allows me to kind of, it gives me a space, a pretty broad space to compose in, but I'm never worried I'm going to get lost, right? I just need to think, okay, channel 1, track 1 is bass, channel 2 is leads, channel 3 is rhythmic, syncopated, stuff like that, and I never get lost when it comes to the performance aspect. And what really helps this is, like, because I don't actually look inside these patterns when I'm performing, right? It would be a lot of work to go into a particular chain, figure out, oh, okay, this is what the rhythm is, this is what the instruments are. I don't like to do that during my performance, so by structuring the project so that each column is a general kind of pattern, I can just throw on a pattern in my bass or throw on a pattern in my syncopated rhythmic section and be relatively assured that it will be what I think it is, but I don't know exactly what it is. So it will still surprise me, but in a knowable way. So that's kind of why I like to structure the project this way. And it's also how I structured it in my parting project when I was working in Ableton. So now that we have the different patterns laid out, I want to talk about the controller mapping. So the top half of the controller is devoted to the synth section. I essentially map the cutoffs of every single instrument that appears in a single track onto one pot. So everything in this first track, which is all my basses, I'm gonna, go in. I have my instrument, and you can see the filter cutoff is moving. So everything in here, that was instrument 00. I go down here, it's instrument 03. They're all mapped to the same pot. And this allows me to know that every time I want to change the cutoff or change the sound a little bit, I know what part of the performance I'm actually changing the cutoff for. And I don't ever really need to worry about accidentally changing multiple tracks cutoff, because I'm very careful to make sure that instruments that appear within a track only ever appear within that specific track, and they don't progress out to other kinds of the other tracks. So this knob will be my bass knob. This is my leads knob. This is my rhythmic melodic knob. And so it's really easy to structure in the heat of a performance. It's really easy to understand, okay, so if I twist this knob, then that's my bass. So that's how I lay it out. I have 7 knobs mapped, and then this one just doesn't do anything right now. When it comes to the bottom half of my controller, these are my drum knobs. So this first knob is my kick drum. So I have my kick drum, right? Kick drum knob. And I map it to this knob because, if I ever want to take the kick drum away or bring it back, that's a really easy technique to kind of rile the crowd up, get things going. I know that I have one knob that will do that. The next 4 knobs are correlated with my percussive elements that lie in between the kick drum and the hi-hats. And again, I don't touch these usually in the middle of a sequence. I will use them to cut parts off of a sequence if I'm transitioning in between 2 different drum patterns. But once they're up, they usually stay up until I need to transition between patterns. These middle 2 knobs here are mapped to the decay, the decay values, the decays values of the volume envelope that I have on my hi-hats. And so what this allows me to do is, as my hi-hats are working, I can increase the energy of these hi-hats if I want, right? So that's my closed hi-hat. I can increase the energy of the closed hi-hat and make it a little bit, open it up a little bit, make it a little bit more energetic. And then if I want to work with my my open hi-hats, right, I'm turning this into a little bit more of a ride cymbal as I open it up. Right, and so these are 2 easy ways to dictate the energy of a particular performance sequence. And so those are mapped to the decays of the hi-hats. And then the last one, this knob here, is mapped to the DJ filter. The DJ filter was introduced in a later firmware, and I just use the high pass part of it. So, I start at 80, I mapped it so that it goes all the way up to FF, and back down to 80 at its lowest pot value. So it's a really easy way to generate energy, generate some kind of cool breakdown, right? I'm grooving and we're going. And then, I want to switch sections or just kind of change it up a little bit. So, just kind of whoop, and then go back to my default section. So that is my MIDI controller layout. Top half is for synths, bottom half is for drums and the DJ filter. Now, let's talk about the approach to the performance, right? I have a general approach to performing with, I usually start off with a general idea of where I want to start and a general idea of where I want to end. I usually start off with just like a nice pretty pad that I can kind of bring in, right, slowly, kind of ease people into the idea of the music, right? And once this is set up, then I like to introduce some of the percussive elements, right? So let's get rid of the kick drum, get rid of all of these actually, and the hi-hats, and, kind of introduce them to some smaller percussive elements. Let me actually do this. So smaller percussive elements with the pad, right? And as we're, we can kind of build in, add more elements, add a bass line, right? And once the bass line comes in, this is typically when I start my kick drum. Once the kick drum goes off, once the kick drum comes in, then we know that we're ready to go. This is the performance, the actual performance. I typically end in the reverse of that. So, start with everything in, slowly drop off elements until we're left with like pretty pad, and then kind of fade out from there. But the most interesting part of the performance is obviously the middle part, right? Because I have my start and I have my end, but the middle part is me trying to get the audience and me to from that start to that end, and I don't know how we're going to get there. There's no map, right? It's all based on how I'm feeling, how they're feeling, how they react to the things that I'm doing. So I have a few key guidelines while I'm performing that I try to follow during that middle section. The first guideline that I tend to follow is not to use too many parts, synth parts simultaneously. Because, again, one of my big tenets for live performance as a whole is I like it when I can see and connect physical movements to a change in sound, right? So if I start my synth parts, right, everything's playing at the same time, and I start going pretty wacky on the bass line, change the cutoff and everything, you might be able to hear it if you're paying attention. I've told you that, that's what's happening, so you are paying attention. But if you're in the middle of a crowd, you're dancing, you're talking to your friends, you're wherever, right, it's harder to hear that that's actually happening. What makes things easier is if I limit myself to 2 or 3 synth patterns, right? So we're going here, right, and then I start going wacky on the drum, on the bass line, right? It's easier to hear that the bass line is changing, even though there's still more than just the bass line playing, because we have less elements and it's competing with less sound as a whole. I can also, change up the lead line, maybe take away the lead line and, just play with the bass line and the rhythmic part, right? So having a lower number of synth parts playing simultaneously allows me to really connect the audience between what I'm doing with my hands and what they're hearing in the speakers, right? Sometimes if I'm feeling, really, really good about stuff, I'll just leave one synth part on and just, start grooving around with the knob, and it allows everyone to kind of connect to what I'm doing, which I think is really important. I don't ever want to be the person up there that's just, I'm up here and I have all of the knowledge and you have none of it and you will have to figure it out, right? That's not what I'm about as a performer. I like to try and bring the audience into things. So that's the first part. The second guideline that I like to follow is breaking the performance up into tonal and atonal sections. So I have my synth pattern laid out. So I have my tonal or melodic elements, and then I have my atonal elements. And one of the biggest issues that I had when I was performing live with different setups is, what do I do next, right? I'm in the middle of the performance. I'm working my way through my songs. What do I do next? Before, the answer was go to the next song. And then in my Ableton days, right, before I was playing techno, it was there's nothing to do next, right? You just follow the songs as they play out. But it's easy to get confused. It's easy to get lost as you're performing with how to move beyond the single pattern that you're working with into the next pattern. So I like to transition in between tonal and atonal sections because it just is a very easy answer to the question of what do I do next? If I'm in a tonal section, I move to the atonal section. If I'm in an atonal section, I just move back to the tonal section. And there are ways to string multiple tonal or atonal sections back to back, but I typically find that they work best when you make some big change in between those two similar sections, right? So if I'm playing with my tonal sections, right, and I forgot to. So if I'm playing with my tonal sections, right, and I want to transition between this tonal section to another tonal section, but I'm keeping the drum pattern the same. I'm transitioning into this next section. It will sound pretty similar to the first section just by the nature of it continuing to be tonal. And so if I don't make a big change here, then I won't really, the audience won't really know that I've switched sections, which I want them to. So, you know, maybe it's as simple as adding a hi-hat pattern, right? Adding both hi-hat patterns in, kind of, you know, bringing this out to a ride. Maybe it's the kind of thing where I take away the kick drum for like the entirety of this section, and it becomes like a transitory breakdown section kind of thing, right? Maybe I take out the bass, maybe I take out the lead, right? But there needs to be some big difference between the two similar sections, otherwise it's really hard for the audience to tell what I'm doing. The last guideline that I like to follow is actually a saying. It's a quote that I heard in My Alarm Melodies' video about performing live with modular. And that quote is, if it happens once, it's a mistake. If it happens twice, it's jazz. In this case, if it happens twice, it's techno. And what that means is it essentially, I think it talks about the ways that music is a rhythmic medium, right? It's a time-based medium and it's a rhythmic medium. And so what rhythm requires is repetition of some sort. If I'm working in my set, right, and I accidentally bring up an element I'm not supposed to, or I haven't planned on it, and I panic and say, oh crap, that shouldn't have been there. If I shut that element off and don't bring it back again, then the audience understands that's a mistake. They should have brought it back, but it's actually a mistake. And so if I bring the element, panic, turn it off, but then realize, oh, I want it to happen multiple times, it will stop being a mistake if I bring it up again. I wait the 4 bars, I wait the 4 beats into the next bar, then I bring it up in the same rhythm, and then take it away again, and then wait until the next measure, bring it up again, take it away again. Suddenly, I'm not making a mistake, I'm performing. I'm doing the thing rhythmically because I'm repeating the mistake over and over and over again. And it is turning from a mistake to something interesting sonically that I can continue to add to or subtract from. It also allows me to create and sit with different pattern combinations. So if I stumble on something on my synth project that I'm not necessarily all the way into, maybe I don't take it away immediately. Because if I take it away immediately, then that means, oh, I made a mistake that doesn't sound good. I don't want the audience to listen to it. But if I sit there, let it ride out a little bit, maybe I'll take it away earlier than a normal section, but not just immediately panic and move away from it, then it gives me the ability to kind of signify, hey, I'm comfortable here. Don't panic, bring things in rhythmically, and try to repeat the mistake again. Because if you repeat the mistake again, it stops being a mistake and starts becoming part of the track. So those are my general guidelines for performing. The next thing I want to go over is transitions between sections. And the way I like to lay these out is really simple. It's kind of like a DJ. I typically remove one element. It's typically the kick drum. Remove that element, bring in a new element, and then I bring in the old element with a variant somehow, right? So I bring in the kick drum, the same kick drum, but I add a hi-hat pattern, or I bring in a different kick drum, or something like that, right? So let's kind of play this out. So I'm gonna start, so let's play this out. I'm gonna start with a bass pattern and a rhythmic pattern here. Okay, so let's play this out. I'm going to start with a bass pattern and a rhythmic pattern here, and then I'm just going to play out the drums, right? Drums are going, hi-hats are going. I want to change the section. I want to change from this tonal section to a atonal section. So what I'm going to do is take out the drums, right? So I've had enough. We're changing, right? So kick drum comes out. I'm going to slowly bring in the atonal section. Maybe get rid of the bass as well because it might conflict with the tonal section. Slowly get rid of the remnants of the tonal section. And while all of this is happening, I'm switching my kick drum pattern, my kick drum itself to a different row. So when I bring it back in, it's going to have changed. So now I'm fully in my atonal section. I haven't brought the kick drum back yet, so we're not totally comfortable. We're still in a bit of a limbo right now. But now I'm ready to bring it back to a default baseline setting. You know, okay, I do DJ filter and then kick drum comes back in. Now that the kick drum is back in, I can start playing with this tonal section and, you know, doing whatever I want with it. So that is a typical transition for me, is removing an element, bringing in a new element, then bringing back one of those elements but with a variant. And that's typically how I transition between sections. And yeah, that's pretty much how I perform using two M8s only. I have a few future plans. I have a few plans to kind of expand this setup a little bit, maybe change it up. So the first thing I want to do is mess with introducing new synthesizers into the setup. I really do like having only these two be my sound sources, but I think that there's room for a little bit more playability. And so when I'm thinking about synths to add, I really only want to add synths that have, one, a lot of character, and two, are very playable. So I might want to bring back the quadrantid swarm. I might want to mess with like a make noise O-coast, maybe a Game Boy running nano loop. But all of those have very distinct sonic characteristics, and they're also very playable. So that is the extent to which I want to add additional synths into the setup. Nothing as big as like adding an octatrack or a new drum machine or whatever. I'm pretty happy with this. I also want to experiment with macro synth design, or just the design of my synths in general, especially the atonal stuff. I feel like I can get more out of it, so I'm just going to try. And the last thing I want to do is mess with stuff actually in the chain, these commands within the phrase. So my intention is to allow the phrase itself to contain a lot of the experimentation and to change itself around and do interesting things. So I'm relying less on just changing the filter cutoffs to create that interest, and it will instead just exist within the phrase itself. I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. All of this is in the future, but yeah. So those are my plans. Hopefully you got something out of this explanation. I guess I should say you should like and subscribe because that's YouTube, I guess. But, you know, you don't have to. And I also have a Bandcamp, so if you like any of the music that you've heard on the channel, or you want to explore or hear examples of what I'm talking about here, I have my Bandcamp. I also have the other videos in the channel, so if you go into the Bandcamp, download the stuff, that'd be cool. And yeah, that's my explainer video for this live performance setup. Hopefully it was helpful. And yeah, I'll talk to you later in the next one.